Oh, if it's your first time at Freedom Church, we usually have less hair metal, but we shouldn't. We really shouldn't. We should have more. In fact, I think my man Dave over here has been waiting to play that guitar lick for 5+ years at Freedom Church. This is his jam. He had that haircut in the 80s, and so he knows how to play that. And we were having fun. Aren't you glad we can have fun at church? Aren't you glad? And I know what some of you were thinking. You were like, you should have got a better wall. Like, you should have got a better wall. And so we're going to pass the tithe offerings one more time, buckets. Here, come along, no. But we are continuing in our series called Playlists, One Hit Wonders, and it has been a fun time. We're having fun with it. And God began to do a work last week in your life. I know He has. And He is encouraging you in His greatness and in His trustworthiness. In fact, I was talking to so many of you after last weekend, and you were like, hey, God really is moving in my life. He's doing something in my life, and I am so glad about what He's doing. In fact, I had one gentleman came up to me and said, hey, I'm here for the first time in a long time, maybe even been the first time. And he said, I want you to pray for me this week because I'm going through what you were talking about, and I need some encouragement because I'm going to get some exploratory surgery, and I'm having that done, and I'm nervous about it, and would you pray with me? And so I got a chance to pray with them, but most of all, got to see that God is working in our lives. And we saw last week that we can trust God with everything, even the things that don't make sense to us. Have you ever had things in your life that just don't make sense to you? That you're like, I don't know what's going on with this. It doesn't make sense to me. That they lost one of their pieces of the wall. I'm going to go put it up over here so that I don't trip on it and again end up on YouTube, and that would be not awesome. But you've had these times where things just don't make sense to you, right? And you're going through stuff and you're battling through things and you don't know why that's happening. And when we're going through that stuff, we learn that we can trust God. And I was thinking more about last weekend, and I really felt this in my spirit. Some of you are close to a breakthrough. You're so close to a breakthrough, but you're also so close to giving up. Did you hear that? Some of you are so close to giving up, but you're so close to a breakthrough. You are right on the line, and you don't even know it. You don't know that you're right there. You're getting ready to see the promise, and that's what we're going to talk about this week, is the promise that God has for you. And you're getting ready to break through to the promise, but you don't know how close you are, and so you are about to give up. And I just want to encourage you this week to not give up. You've been discouraged by the events in your life, maybe even some of the circumstances that we talked about last weekend that makes us question God's goodness. That you're like, oh man, is God kind? Is He really good because of some of the things that are going on in my life? And you've been considering quitting, and here's what I want to encourage you with this weekend. Don't give up. Don't quit. You are so close. In fact, look at your neighbor and say, don't give up. Look at your other neighbor and say, don't quit. Look at the person behind you, say, you are so close. You're so close. And I just want to encourage us not to give up. I want to see some of the attributes of God in a story that is quite unusual in the Bible, out of the book of Joshua. Part of my role as your pastor is sometimes to give you a little push. Everybody say push. And I'm going to give you a little push today so that you don't give up. And I want you to see that if you can be pushed into your promise today. You have a promise. Did you know that? Not just the people you read about in the Bible, but you have a promise. Not just your neighbor that you think has got it more together than you, but you have a promise. Not just the staff here at the church. You're like, oh, I know they got a promise. No, you have a promise. But here's what I need you to do. I need you to be able to see more about and think more about your promise than your predicament. Now, I know you have a predicament. I know there's some things that you're like, oh, I'm in a little bit of a predicament. I don't know what to do about it. But I want you to think more about your promise than you do your predicament. I want you to think more about your promise than you do your past. Now, I know that your past haunts you. And I know you've made some mistakes. And I know you've done some things that you're not, it's all honored by, God wasn't honored by. But I want you to push past that. And I want you to think more about your promise than your past. I want you to think more about your promise than your pain. And I know your pain is real. I know what you went through is real. I know what you're experiencing right now because of it is real. But I want to push you, everybody say push, to think more about your promise than your pain. I want you to think more about your promise than your pessimism. It never works out for me. I never get through it. And I mean, I know that pastor says there's a promise for everybody. God talks about these promises, but those must not have been about me, because all I ever see is that it never works out for me. I want you to push past your promise more than your pessimism. I want you to push past your promise more than your problem. How many of you got 99 problems, right? You got some problems, and I know that, but I want you to push past that problem, get that out of the way, and I want you to push into the promise that God has for you. And I could come up with P words all day long, because I can do this for a long time. I'm good at alliteration. It is a gift that I have. It is a curse sometimes, but I'm not going to give you any more words, because what I want you to remember is that you have a promise. And I know it's hard to believe sometimes. I know that in your pain, in your predicament, because of your past, because of that problem, that you really do go, wait a minute, do I still have a promise? Does God still have a promise for me? So I want you to own your promise. In fact, right now, just the best you can, why don't you just in your mind think about, what is that promise that God gave us? Maybe that promise that God gave you, you remember when he spoke it to you. He said what he was going to do in you and through you. He said what your family was going to look like. He said how you were going to be the first one to break a generational curse. He told you that this is what it was going to be, but over the years, the pain, the problem, the predicament, your past, your pessimism has caused you not to really be able to believe that God has a promise for you. Some of you right now are sitting in a place where you go, I don't believe it anymore that God has a promise for my kids. I don't believe it anymore that God's got a promise to use my talents and my abilities. I don't know if I can believe it anymore that God's got a promise for my marriage. Pastor, if I could just tell you about my marriage, you know, he doesn't have a promise for my marriage. Maybe he's got one for everybody else's. Maybe that's good. But you've started to believe the lie that he doesn't have a promise. So I want you to own it. What is the promise that God has for you right now in a real way? And don't worry about, is it a big promise or is it something extraordinary? Just, it's your promise, right? Everything's significant when it's yours. And it's your promise. And so I want you to own the promise. It's a gift from God. Don't quit on it. He made you for a purpose. And we're going to learn how we can grab those promises of God in the book of Joshua. So Joshua chapter 6. Joshua is the 6th book in the Bible. And we're going to be in the 6th chapter in the 6th book of the Bible. And my title to my sermon today, I want you to help me with it. Say it after me. Say, push past 6. Push past 6. And I want us to see today how we can push past 6 to get to the promise that God has for us. And we're going to read a story out of the Bible. It's a little longer of a story than we normally read at once, but just stay with me. You push past all of the distractions for that. You can follow along on the screen, or if you have your Bible app in front of you, I am in the NLT version of the Bible. And we're entering the first battle that the people of God have as Joshua now is in charge. Moses was in charge, now Joshua is in charge. God gave Moses a promise, really he gave Abraham a promise, said here's the promise that you're gonna have. Moses didn't get to lead the people there, but now Joshua is fighting the first battle to be able to lead the people into the promised land. It was their promise, and they're gonna have to push past some things to break through to get to their promise. And so what we see is this is the first breakthrough towards their promise. You have a breakthrough for your promise. And here's what I've always said. You don't have to break through unless there's something to break through. So you've got to know there's going to be resistance. There is an enemy of your soul who wants to see you down, who wants to see you taken out of the game, who wants to see you depressed. He wants to see you not have influence. He wants to see you not have a great marriage. He wants to see you not have a good relationship with your kids, with your coworkers. He doesn't want you to break through anything. There's going to be resistance. And I bet along the way that Joshua had a few dark nights of the soul as well. Remember we talked about last week, a dark night of the soul is when you get up against a wall, and Joshua literally is going to get up against a wall in a moment, but even the wall inside of his heart, where he's going, wait a minute, did God really tell me I was supposed to be the leader after Moses? Does God really want me to lead? He had to have some of those moments where he is up against a wall for breakthrough. And what we're getting ready to see is that things are going to happen in such an unusual way. That's why this is a one-hit wonder, because it's an unusual story, happens in an unusual way where God is really speaking to Joshua. And it's not the way that Joshua thought he would break through. And I'm going to tell you, most of the time in my life, when I have something that I know I need to break through, it has not been the way that I thought I would break through. In fact, the way we break through isn't always the way that we think God ought to. Now, I know you don't like to say these kind of things, but I know you think them. Don't you have a way that you think God ought to? Right? I mean, God's God. But God, if we could just talk for just a minute. God, I know you're in charge, but have you thought about, God, can we just sit down and I know you're going to move, but here's the way you ought to move. Because that's when we get disappointed, isn't it? When God doesn't move the way we think he ought to move. And what we're going to see is that the way through breakthrough isn't always the way you think God ought to, and Joshua gets to learn that as well. So Joshua chapter 6, starting in verse 1. Now, the gates of Jericho were tightly shut. The gates of Jericho were tightly shut. Can I remind you real quick that getting to your next, getting to your promise will not be easy. If it was easy, everybody would have already broken through. If it were easy, everybody would be like I'm not going to quit, I'm going to keep going. If it were easy, no one would stop right before the finish line because they would know I'm getting ready to break through. It's not going to be easy. You will feel shut out. You will feel like you can't possibly get through. But the enemy is not playing games, y'all. He wants to keep you shut out because Jesus opens shut doors, but the enemy is trying to bar them shut. And so we see this, that here's what's crazy, is that Jesus opens doors and the enemy is actually afraid of you. See, wait a minute, y'all didn't hear that, because if y'all heard that, y'all would have shouted a little bit. Y'all would have said amen. Y'all would have said something. Even the most reserved of you would have at least gone, mm-hmm. Like y'all would have give me something. So let me say that again. What you don't see is that the enemy is actually afraid of you. Your enemy, who's trying to make you think that you should cower and that you're defeated and you're depressed, and he's always telling you all these lies. He is afraid of you. Don't believe it? Look close. Now, the gates of Jericho were tightly shut because, everybody shout out because. Because what? The gates of Jericho were tightly shut because the people inside the promise, inside the gate, the enemy, were afraid of the Israelites. So they are on the other side of this wall. Over here is where the promise is. And the Israelites are on this side, and you know they got to be thinking, oh man, there's a stronger enemy on the other side of this wall. Oh man, what are we going to do? If this wall does come down, how are we going to fight them? If this wall comes down, how are we going to walk through this? And what they don't know is on the other side, in the promise, what God has already delivered and promised them, all that, the enemy is cowering in fear. They are afraid of them. They were shut tight, not because they were stronger, but because they were afraid of the power of God. See, your enemy, he is a liar. And he whispers in your mind. He says, oh, you can't do that. You can't be the dad that he's called you to be. You can't do that. You can't be used by me. Look at your past. Look at all the problems you've got all around you. Look at this predicament you've gotten yourself into. How could you be used with the type of pain you have? The enemy says, it's all gone. It's all done. You can't fight. And the reason he's telling you that is because he's a liar. He lies to you because what he really knows is he knows you have the power of God. You know how I believe and know that your marriage can actually be saved? I don't care where you're at on it. If you could say, well, if I can make coffee with you, Pastor, I could tell you how my marriage can be saved. You just don't know what all I've gone through. You know how I know? Because you got the power of God. You know how I know? Because your enemy's cowering on the other side. Because the last thing he wants is for your marriage to get healed. Because if your marriage gets healed, then the power of God will be shown through it. Because everybody around you knows you don't have the power to do it. And so he said, you got the power of God. He knows you have the presence of God. Oh, how sweet is the presence of God in your life. It's the secret sauce to success in the Christian life. And let me tell you, we're going to preach on that next weekend. Power and the presence of Holy Spirit, as we're going to go into some New Testament stuff for the last 2 weekends. You want to be here for that. You want to make sure here. It's Father's Day too, so come on and be here. Celebrate dads and bring them to church with you and all that kind of good stuff. And we're going to talk about the power and the presence of God. And the enemy knows you have the power and the presence of God. He knows that you're going to win. He knows you're on the other side of that wall and that you think that he is stronger, but he's not stronger. You've got a stronger God than him. He knows that you are going to push through the wall. He knows that you're so close. In fact, the enemy starts to bark the most, the closer you get. He knows you are right up against the wall. And this is what the Israelites were on the other side of this wall. Oh, they're right there. They're about to push forward into their promise. And on the other side, there is an enemy who is cowering. There is an enemy who knows they're so close. And the power to claim your promise, though, is in your perspective. You got to get a new perspective. This is so good for everything in life, by the way. The power to claim your promise in any area of your life is in a new perspective. Being able to see things the way that God sees them. We must see some things differently in order to act differently. We must see some things differently in order to have a different life. We've got to see some things. And when you feel like you're just staring at the same wall repeatedly, you have to see it differently. Look at this story. It says, no one was allowed to go in or out. So the people inside the wall, they're not allowed to go in or out. Why? Because they're afraid of the Israelites. They're afraid of the people of God. And it tells this, it says, but the Lord said to Joshua, I have given you Jericho, its king, and all its strong warriors. There was a word that jumped out to me in that passage when I was reading it. The Lord said this. He said, I have given you Jericho. Wait, now what, God? Given? Because right now, remember, the Israelites are on the other side of an impenetrable city. They're on the other side of a wall that is too tall to just scale. They're on the other side of a wall that cannot be knocked down. They're on the other side of the wall, and God is talking this given. You've given me. You meant you're going to give, right? You meant it's going to happen. God, you just got your 10 cents mixed up. You meant to say you were going to give. The Bible just told us that Jericho, this city that was not very large, but was known for its very high walls, and it was very fortified. It was on lockdown. It made our lockdown not even look funny. I mean, it was on lockdown, and the Israelites are on the outside, very much not on the inside. So they're on the outside of their promise, and look, they've been on the outside of their promise for a long time. They know what it's like to not be in the midst of their promise. Just like some of us. God gave me this promise, but man, I've been on the outside of it longer than I've been believing for it. I've been seeing it not happen way more than I've been seeing it happen. I don't even feel like I'm close. Pastor, you told me I'm close, but it feels very far away for me right now. I don't know how I would ever get to the promise that you have for me. And the Israelites are on the outside, and God's saying, I have given, past tense, already done. It sounds like one of my favorite phrases in all the Bible, in the New Testament. It is finished. When Jesus was on a cross, and I want you to remember where Jesus was in this very moment. He was on a cross dying, taking his last breath. Have you ever been at a place where you look at it and go, we're not going to break through? It would be at the cross of Jesus. You're going, as a friend, as a follower, you're going, he's going to die. He's breathing his last breath. And it's in this paradox of the fact that he's breathing his last breath when he says it is finished. But he wasn't talking about him being finished. He was talking about it being finished. And he says it is finished. He's speaking in past tense when it looks like the future tense is dreadful. When it looks like the present tense is so horrible. And he's dying. He's breathing his last breath. And he says it is finished. And so what you see looks so different because Jesus is dying on the cross and he says it is finished. They are staring at the backside of a wall that separates them from their promise. You are discouraged because you haven't made any leeway at all in the area that God seems to have promised you that you would. And you keep seeming like you're going backwards. It keeps feeling like you've been pressed in upon. And so what you can see looks so different. In fact, what do you do when what you see doesn't look anything like what God has said? Because God said he had given, but that's not what it looked like. God said it is finished, and yeah, I guess it looked like he was finished. They could have taken that a whole nother way, right? It is finished. God said that I'm going to be restored in this relationship and can have forgiveness with my parents or forgiveness with my kids, or the work situation's going to get worked out. God said he's going to relieve me of this addiction. God said he's going to heal my marriage. God said I'm going to get to use my skills one day in a way that serves him. God said I'm not going to be able to have to walk around with all this unforgiveness and this trauma that sort of like dictates everything that I do. God said, but what I see doesn't look like what God said. God said he is given, and yet they're still looking at the back of the wall. God tells them what to do, though, and I think he's teaching us a principle as well in this. This is huge. It continues on. You and your fighting men. What kind of men? You and your fighting men should fight. Is that what it says? No, that's the substandard version of the Bible. That one doesn't work. What does it say? You and your fighting men should march around the town once a day for 6 days. They're fighting men. Fighting men are supposed to fight. That's what fighting men do. You know Joshua had to have an ought to moment. I mean, God, this is what we ought to do. I've trained the men. They're ready to fight. I've been preparing for this for a moment, telling them that, we were going to get to go take this land one day. And so for years and decades now, we've been training the young men, and we've been training them to be fighters because we knew this day was going to come, God. So we are ready to fight. God, we are ready to take this wall. We are ready to do what you've called us to do. And God says, you and your fighting men should march. See, obedience will often take us into unfamiliar territory. They were ready to fight, but they didn't really know how to march. What does that mean, to march around the walls when we could go fight? Let's push the walls down. Let's make sure that we know exactly what we can do. We can move some things, God. We'll move it out of the way. You let us move some things, and we'll move it, and then we'll tear this wall down, and then we'll do what we do best, God. We will fight. And God says, no, I want you to march. See, I think what God was doing in this moment and what he's doing for us as well is he's beginning to teach them that really what it's about and really what we're getting back to is trusting God. See, because we're trained on certain things. Every one of us are trained. We train ourselves how to act in certain situations. So they would have said, we're trained to fight. We're not trained to march. And here you're trained too. Everything we do trains our mind. And some of you would say, well, wait a minute. Hey, you're trained to worry. You may be trained to worry, but God is calling you to worship. I mean, but what you've trained yourself to do, when the situation comes, what do? You worry. That's what you do best. You're like, I'm a fighting man. I'm a worrying woman. I'm a worrying man. That's what I do. I know how to worry. Worry helps me move the wall, you would say. So I need to worry. But what we just sung was, no, wait a minute. This is how I fight my battles. How do we fight our battles? We worship. And so we're saying, hey, we need to be trained to worry. I mean, not to worry, but to worship. You may be trained to strive. A lot of us in our relationship with God especially is like, we got to work. We got to strive. We got to do something. So problem comes at you, predicament you get yourself into, pain that you're trying to deal with, all these things. You're just like, I will strive. I will work. I will do what I need to do. And here's what God tells us oftentimes to do when we're striving. He says, I want you to stop. Just stop. Every single day, they would walk around the wall once. That's what he told them to do. And then what do they have to do? Stop. no striving, no, just ceasing. Just let me be God. You may be trained to react. There are certain ways that you react to all kinds of things. Some of it comes from different things you've experienced in your life, different pain you've been through. Some of it comes from this is just the way you were wired and you've always acted and you've never kind of refined that part of yourself. And so you have this way that you react, but oftentimes that reaction is sin. And so God is saying, hey, rather than reacting, what if you were to repent? What does repent mean? It means to change my mind, to change the way that I think about something, to literally lay down my way, my ought to, and go, God, I know I have an ought to, but I don't have anything without you. And so I'm going to give you everything. And what we're really getting back to is trusting God, trusting him. In fact, God could have allowed them to go up to the wall and just shout and just scream and see the wall fall down. And they all would have known instinctively in their mind that you can't take a wall down by shouting at it, right? You know that. You can go shout at that wall over there all you want to, but that wall is not going to come down by your shout. But if you went and shouted at it and God brought it down, you might start to believe a little bit about your shout. You might even believe your shout's a little better than it is. You might start to think, you know what, I did a little bit of that. I did a little bit of that. I was a part of that. And God wanted them to know, like, you don't have to do anything. You just let me be God. And as you let me be God in your life, your problems, your predicaments, your pain, your problems, they will all fade away. You just let me be God. So the 7 priests, it says, will walk ahead of the ark, each carrying a ram's horn. And on the 7th day, you are to march around the town 7 times with the priests blowing the horns. When you hear the priests give one long blast of the ram's horn, now you've got a part right here. We're getting ready to get up to what the people have to do. When we get to this word, it's going to tell you what to do. I want you to do it. I don't want you to say the word. I want you to do what the word says, all right? You're going to see it when it comes. You've got a part. Just get ready. The first experience did really good. I think y'all can do better, all right? So let's just try. I'm not using competition. I'm just trying to say you can do better. All right, so let's go. All right, when you hear the priests give one long blast on the ram's horn, have all the people... You did much better the first time. I'm just going to say, I think you're going to grow, but you did much better. As loud as they can. Then the walls of the town will collapse, and the people can charge straight into the town. So Joshua called together the priests and said, take up the ark of the Lord's covenant and assigned 7 priests to walk in front of it, each carrying a ram's horn. That's like a trumpet. Then he gave orders to the people, march around the town, and the armed men will lead the way in front of the ark of the Lord. After Joshua spoke to the people, the 7 priests with the ram's horns started marching in the presence of the Lord, blowing the horns as they marched, and the ark of the Lord's covenant followed behind them. Some of the armed men marched in front of the priests with the horns, and some behind the ark, with the priests continually blowing the horns. Now Joshua says this, do not shout. Do not even talk, Joshua commanded. Not a single word from any of you until I tell you to shout. Then, some of you said the word. I forgive you. It's okay. So the ark of the Lord was carried around the town once that day, and then everyone returned to spend the night in the camp. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests again carried the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests with the ram's horn marched in front of the ark of the Lord, blowing their horns. Again, the armed men marched both in front of the priests and the horns, and behind the ark of the Lord. And all this time, the priests were blowing their horns. On the 2nd day, they again marched around the town once and returned to the camp. And they followed this pattern for 6 days. Once around, return to camp. Once around, return to camp. 6 times in a row, they followed this pattern. Now, as I'm reading this, it makes me a little anxious. And I know the way this story ends. Maybe some of you know the way the story ends. If you read the Bible, some of you might know that. If you haven't, that's okay. You're going to find out how the story ends in just a minute. But I know how the story ends. And I still get a little anxious because I'm astute enough to know that if I had not known how the story was going to end, when I don't know an outcome, I tend to start having an outcry. Like when I don't know what's going to happen, I'm like, God, you know what you're doing here? I mean, I'm the worst. Ask Connie. I'm the worst to be in the passenger side when she's driving. Because I'm like, you know what you're doing here? You swerving a little bit. You swerving a little bit. Hey, brake right there, brake. My kids, Izzy, would not let me teach her how to drive because she said, you're the worst. She would get so upset when I would try to teach her how to drive. She wanted Connie every time. May hurt my feelings, but that's okay. She wanted Connie to teach her how to drive. But why? Because I would brake for her. I would be like, hey, what you doing? Where are you going? Where are you going? Why? Because I like to know what's going on. When I don't know the outcome, I have a little bit of an outcry, a little bit of, God, maybe you ought to. Could you consider maybe? See, my outcry is like, what are we doing here? Where are we going here? You might could call that a control freak. Any other control freaks in the house? See, everybody that says they're not a control freak, you are. You just don't know it because you're a control freak about yourself. We just call it selfish, but you're a control freak. Everybody is, right? About ourselves. We're a little bit of a control freak. And so I need some progress reports from God. 6 days marching around this wall. I'm just supposed to march. Can't say anything. I don't get any progress report. There's not even one of the things, not even moving. There's not like one brick coming down, not even a pebble is stirring. And I don't even get to talk. And here's the other thing. We're only going to do it one time around. Takes about an hour. That doesn't seem like a good work day, right? I mean, we could do a lot more. We got plenty of time. God, let's speed this up. How many of you ever told God, let's speed this up? Right? Come on, God, let's put this thing in the microwave. You like the crock pot? I want to do the microwave. And God's like, I don't even like crock pot. I like a slow cooker, and I do too. Anybody slow? If you're cooking anything slow right now, just let me know. I'll come over to your house afterwards. But God's like, I like to slow cook it. I like to see it really get done. And we're like, can you speed this up? Put it in the microwave? Isn't that our prayer life most of the time? Hey, God, maybe you ought to speed up a little bit. We got a whole day that we could use, but we're just going to walk around one time. It took about an hour for them to walk around the wall. So they're just walking, being silent. Got up and did it early in the morning. So then, got a whole day left. What are we supposed to do? We could go train to fight, but God said we can't even fight. Got to march. So we're supposed to go train to march. So just walking. Just an hour. 1 hour. Feels like such a waste in time. But I think it's because we underestimate the power in an hour. We underestimate the power that just cumulatively. I love the marching illustration. Think about every march, every step is an hour of just another hour, another hour. We're just marching. We're just walking. And if you don't believe there's power in an hour, just think about some practical things in your life. Because I know what we don't believe, and I know we underestimate it because this is what we believe about these things. We underestimate the power in an hour because we are told to exercise, right? But what do we think? I mean, are you sure about that? Like just exercising? I mean, I do all this other stuff, but exercising 1 hour 3 times a week or so, it's really going to be good for me. Even though I read a study this week that says that if you exercise 1 hour, it adds 3 hours to your life. Every hour you exercise adds 3 hours to your life. And so I was reading that study, I was like, okay, but what we do is we go, oh, well, that's not much. Because I mean, really and truly, if I told you you're going to die on this date, and if you exercise, you're going to die 3 hours later, you're like, who cares? Like, what? I mean, it's still dying that day, right? But what you got to think about, every single step is 3 hours. 3 more hours. And it's long obedience in the same direction. Over and over and over again. I'll have people come and they'll go, hey, I got some stress, some tension in our marriage. It's not like my marriage is falling apart. We get those too. But we get some people just like, we want to connect better. We want to know each other more. We want to connect more. So one of the first things I'll ask them is how is your, I call it couch time. I'll be like, how's your couch time? And here's what I mean by couch time. Couch time is just sitting on the couch, telling the kids, go play, do whatever you want to do. Sit on the couch for 15 minutes and just talk. You're like, you sure about that? I mean, yeah, I said I want to connect better, want to know my wife better, want to know my husband better. And you're telling me 15 minutes on the couch is going to do something good? Like 15 minutes? Are you sure about the power that there can be that? And it's just a cumulative effect. Marching. Or how about this one? So a lot of times when marriages are really falling apart, here's what I'll talk to them about. And they're surprised because we encourage them to go to counseling. We encourage them to go to therapy. And that's long term. Like, that's going to take a while, right? You gotta stick to that. That's cumulative as well. But one of the things I tell them, I say, hey, I promise you'll get a hit to your marriage. You will feel better about your marriage if you will start having a date night. And it blows me away. People will be like, they'll be like, hey, my marriage is in a bad place. Like, I feel like we don't even know each other. I'm like, when's the last time you dated? I mean, we dated before we got married, but we don't really date anymore. And I'm like, oh, try this on for size. I wonder if you spent time together in an environment where you've set it up for success. You go out, have some coffee, make it a cheap date, go to pack your own lunch for your date. I don't care. But you go and it's just the two of you, and you sit down. There's power in that hour. I bet if you do that, there's going to be something that's going to happen. Because here's the deal. How can you love somebody if you don't even know them? How can you love somebody if you don't take time to talk to them and get to know them? I don't love my wife anymore. You don't know her anymore. You haven't taken the time to get to know her. And so there's power in that hour. So let's talk about something, even dig a little deeper. Still practical, but with God. People are like, I want to get closer to God. I want to know him more. I want to feel the power and the presence of God, not just know that it's there. So first thing I'll tell them is, hey, how about 3 times a day? Just take 10 minutes. It's 30 minutes a day. Pray, benevolently give everything over to God. Just say, God, it's yours. I give it back to you. I separate from it. I detach, benevolent detachment. I detach from those things. I give it to you. I call you who you are, that you're in charge of my mind. You're in charge of everything. And then I'll read some scripture along with that. I'll let you pray over me. I will do all this thing 3 times a day, 10 minutes. And what people go is, you sure about that? I mean, you think I'm going to get close to God by just spending 3? Because here's what we don't know, that there's power in the what? The pause as well. Not just power in the hour, but there's power in the pause. And so we don't know that effect that it can have. And so what people do is they try it one time. They're like, I tried pausing one time. I'm like, yeah, you added 3 hours to your spiritual life, right? That cumulative effect didn't take effect. You quit after a week. You quit after a month. Oh, I started trying to read the Bible, and I started over in Leviticus. I mean, that's not going to stick. Right? And so you don't see the cumulative power of what God can do when you add those all up. Reading the Bible, being with him. If you don't quit, there's so much power in cumulative stacking of activities. There's power in the hour. Walking around that wall taught trust. Every time they walked around, it was trust. Every time something didn't happen, it was trust. But listen to this. If you're married for 50 years, which God willing, Connie and I will be able to pass fairly easily because we got married so young, and you spend 15 minutes every single day in conversation, that's 4,550 hours of just talking with one another about what's going on and what's happening. If you do a date night, that's 2,600 date nights in our marriage. In a lifetime, if you spend 30 minutes with God every day, that's 13,000 plus hours with God. You say, I didn't start back then. Guess what? It's going to be a bunch of hours if you start now. And so you start piling them on, and you start being with him in a lifetime. But if you won't do it, it won't matter. Because if you quit, you won't have any time with him. You won't know him, and it'll be devastating to your life. Think about this, coming and serving at Freedom Church. Once or twice a week. You say, how would that change my life? And I know a lot of you think that, because here's the truth of the matter. A lot of you don't serve. You come here, you sit one, but you don't serve one. And it's not for guilt. Like, I'm just telling you, there's power. This is for you. But when you go to serve someone else, oh man, that's even more for you. And when you do that, you can see the cumulative effect. And if you were to serve at church one experience every single weekend in some capacity, at least 80% of the time, I'm giving you 20% of the time off for vacation, travel, and sometimes just to wake up and go, I don't want to go to church today. I'm giving you that. If you do that, that's 40 hours a year poured into serving about 2,400 people cumulatively who say they attend Freedom Church, who would count Freedom Church as home. That makes an effect and a cumulative effect in people's lives. Let me tell you what kind of effect it makes. It means 123 students who are going to camp this year whose lives are going to be changed forever. It's because of the people who pour in. That's 246 students that have come to Freedom Church this year on Wednesday nights. That's 1,161 baptisms that have happened right here at Freedom Church since we began this church. That's 309 kids in Freedom Kids every single weekend in average attendance. That's a small church by itself. And that is the cumulative effect. And all of those lives being changed, and all the marriages being healed, and the people who are stepping into their promises, that is God working in this. If you don't stop, and you don't quit, and you don't give up. See, so you can be like, but I would walk 500 miles and 500 more, just a man that walks 1,000. I didn't need all the da-da-da stuff. I had my time. Here's the deal. That's a great proclamation. It's a great word to have for your life. I will walk 1,000. I'll walk 500. I'll walk 500 more. Here's the deal. Here's what I can't do for you. I wish I could, quite frankly, but I can't. The only way you walk 500 miles, the only way you walk 500 more, take the first step. See, God knew what he was teaching them when he taught them about marching. Because every single step builds on another step. Again, it's long obedience in the same direction over and over again. And they had this wall that they were behind, and they needed to walk around it. And they had been told, if you'll just walk around this wall over and over, it was marching over and over again. But sometimes, I'm like you, I need more progress reports than that. Sometimes I just need more, I need more striving. If I'll just push some bricks over and some blocks over and we'll get this wall down. Just let me go at it for just a little bit. At least, can we just move something? Can we just do something? I need more signs and wonders, God. I need you to rattle a few rocks. I need us to be able to yell one good time and for them to start rattling. And this is why I love Orange Theory Fitness, because I need progress reports every now and then. And I go to Orange Theory, and I love to run on the treadmill. And look, I could run outside for free. I understand that. But I love to run at Orange Theory, and here's why. Because they tell me how fast to run. And they tell me when to run real fast, when to run kind of medium fast, and when to run kind of slow. And then they tell me how long to do it. And while I'm running, a coach tells me, you can do it, Shawn. You're victorious. You're a winner. India, who's one of the coaches who comes to church here, she says, you're a champion, Shawn. And I need somebody telling me I'm a champion as I'm running. And so I can run fast. I can run for a long time, but I can run even better if they're like, all right, 3 minutes to push. You're going to push for 3 minutes. All right, you got a minute left. You got 15 seconds left. And that just helps me. But how many of you have found that oftentimes with God, you don't get that kind of progress report? That you're marching, but you're not hearing anything. In fact, he told you to be silent. So you just got to trust him. And you know he's got the promise over here, at least you think he does. But sometimes it begins to be discouraging. So they're on vocal rest. No encouragement, no check-in. It's like, God, can't you just make one brick fall out of the wall so that I can be encouraged? And here's what I saw in this when I was reading this. God, he is calling us to a new level of obedience to prepare us for a new level of breakthrough. You can't break through the new wall with the last time's obedience, because it's stacking on each other. In your health, you build on each other. In your mental health, you build on successes. You build on retraining the mind of how to do things. In your marriage, it doesn't get from here to over there. It's one step at a time. You build on it, and every single step is going to take a new level of obedience. You're going to have to get strengthened. Sometimes we're like, God, why are you waiting to give me my promise? And he's not waiting to give you your promise. He's waiting until you're ready to get the promise, until you can hold it, until you're strong enough for it. And it takes a new level of obedience. And on the seventh day, the Israelites got up at dawn and marched around the town as they had done before. I love that phrase. As they had done before. What do? They do it again. Isn't it funny? We're always praying, God, do it again, but sometimes we're unwilling to do it again. It's just, they woke up and did what they had done before. They marched around the town as they had done before. They got it. They went and did 15 minutes of couch time again, as they'd done before. They got it and they went to the gym again, as they had done before. They walked past that addiction again, as they had done before. They forgave them when it came back up in their mind, and they didn't think that they thought they'd forgiven them before, but then they realized that they forgave them again. They did it as they'd done before. It's step after step after step, doing it as they had done before. But this time, they ran around the town 7 times. 7 is the number of completion in the Old Testament, in the Bible, and biblical language, by the way. So it is finished. And the 7th time around, as the priest sounded the long blast of the horns, your part's coming up, don't fall asleep on me. Joshua commanded the people, for the Lord has given you the town. 7 times in that 7th day, they got to go around. And I was thinking about it. Up until that 7th time, it was 6 times around, right? 6 times on that 7th day, they had to do the work that they had done the first 6 days. Right before the breakthrough is when the enemy of your soul gets the loudest. We talked about that earlier. Right before your breakthrough is when it gets the hardest. The most prayers have to be prayed. You got to spend more time with God because you need His strength even more. 7 times or 6 times they had walked around that wall in the first 6 days, and now they've done it 6 times all in one day. 6 times around. And it's about an hour around, but theologians tell us it probably would break some different things that they'd had to done. Had that many people, 40,000 marchers, by the way, marching around the wall. 40,000 of them marching around the wall. That there would be breaks that they would have to take, and they would have to get water, and they'd have to have lunch. It could have taken at least 10, maybe 12 hours to march around that final day. And they've done that 6 times. Then you know that it had to be a little discouraging after walking around 1 hour at a time, 1 lap at a time for the first 6 days. And now you're like, all right, this is the final day. Something's going to happen. And you've walked around another 6 times, and nothing has happened. I'll put it to you like this. You've prayed for your daughter 1 more time, now 6 more times, and nothing seems to be happening. You've asked God for that promotion 6 times, and now 6 more times, and nothing seems to happen. You've gotten alone with God and said, God, let me get over the betrayal 12 times now. And still, nothing has happened. People had to be starting to doubt. Joshua, you sure you heard from God? And that's what you'll do to yourself too. You'll be like, yeah, I don't think I even heard from God. I think I probably misheard. I didn't know what I was talking about. I was young and excited about the Lord when He gave me that promise. And I didn't really know all the things that were going to come and all the pain, the predicaments and problems and all the past that was going to come. I didn't know all the truth of how things work. So I don't even think I really heard from God. We don't think Joshua really heard from God. And they started out like, and I would walk 1,000 miles if I could just see you, God. And now they're like, God, we don't see you, so we don't believe you. You know there had to be some discouragement because you would be discouraged. I'm discouraged when nothing happens for the long time. And now they're wondering if maybe losing Moses was the end of God speaking, and they're starting to doubt everything. But then on that 7th trip around the wall, somebody say push past 6. If I could tell you anything today, is push past 6. See, because if we stop at the 6th, what a discouragement it would be to find out you stopped on the 12th lap, when the 6th lap on the 7th day, and all you had to do was push past 6. All you had to do was get 1 more lap in you. And so on the 12th time, the 7th time around the walls, they started shouting. And I bet they were like, I think it was like that hair metal band. They had those trumpets, that they were blowing. They were getting a little bit rowdy with them. A little bit of rock and roll came out with them. They were starting to look like Dave over here playing that solo. They were like, we're not gonna take it. And they're beginning to believe now. Something's stirring up in their minds right now. Something's stirring up in their hearts. And the wall, they start to believe, and the wall starts to shake just a little bit. And they know, because they marched around it all those times, they know it's not them. The trust of God has been built, and now it's long obedience in the same direction. It's consistency plus cumulative effect, and they're starting to get energized. And it says, when the people heard the sound of the ram's horn, they shouted as loud as they could, and suddenly, everybody say suddenly, the walls of Jericho collapsed, and the Israelites charged straight into the town and captured it. I love that word, suddenly. Can we be honest for just a minute? It doesn't feel like suddenly when you walked around 6 times, 6 days in a row, and then you walked around 6 times again and nothing happened. That doesn't feel like suddenly, does it? It doesn't feel like suddenly when you've prayed over and over again that your husband will be sitting in that empty seat beside you, but he's not here today. It doesn't feel like suddenly when you keep getting the same report from the doctor. It doesn't feel like suddenly, does it? Suddenly the walls of Jericho collapsed and the Israelites charged straight into the town and captured it. But I want you to think about something. Perspective. What do we say? The key to grabbing your promise is held in your perspective. God gave them a breakthrough of an impenetrable wall and a fortified city in 7 days with absolutely no striving or fighting. When the people let God be God, he was able to do immeasurably more than they could ever ask for or imagine. So let me just ask you this question. Where do you need to let God be God? Where do you need to let God? Where's the breakthrough getting ready to happen? You just need to let God be God. Where do you need to not give up? Don't quit, because you're so close. 9 years ago, we came up against a wall. It happened when Connie and I, we prayed for a long time. We knew that God maybe wanted to expand our family a little bit, but we knew that we weren't going to do that biologically, so we said, hey, why don't we do this? Instead of having more children, we'll be foster parents, and we can help a lot of kids, and we can be a safe home for people. And our intention with foster care always was that we would be able to give a respite to kids who needed a place where they could be safe and feel loved. And so we said, we can do that. We got plenty of room, and we got plenty of love, and we can do that. And so we started the journey of being foster parents. And we'd actually see 16 children, 17 total, come through our home. 16 children that would come through that would actually go home, and they would get to go be with their parents, and they would get to be reunited in their homes, and we would get to be with them sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months. We never knew how it was going to be. And you talk about walls, and you talk about marching, and you talk about time. I mean, those sometimes were weeks or months that were super hard. In fact, people have told us about being foster parents. They said, I don't know how y'all could be foster parents because, you gave 16 children back to their families, and that would just hurt too much. I couldn't do that. And it was like with this assumption that it didn't hurt us, like they think we're not human or something. Of course it hurt, but we do hard things. That's what Christ followers do. And so we did this, and we would take them on, and then we would get to give them back to their parents, and it was amazing. But there was this one little girl. She was actually our second placement. I've got a picture of her. She came to us, and she stayed for a little bit longer. In fact, she stayed for a couple months. We got to know her really well, and then she stayed for a couple months more. And about, 2.5 years into this whole process, walking with this, asking God, what do you want us to do? How do you want us to do this? We really did come up against this wall. It was this wall of faith, this wall of tension, not knowing what to do, because we really, after 2.5 years of her in our home, but her still being in the foster care system, but we felt like, we think we're her parents. It feels like she's a part of our forever home. She came to us so little, just 18 months old, and so we're like, God, this feels like this, but whatever you want, God, whatever you want. And it just looked like it was going that way. That's what it looked like. It looked like there was no chance that wasn't going to happen, and so we were starting to think that way. We were starting to plan life. You start to see things happening. You see graduations happening. You see weddings happening, and it started to plan life with her in it. And then one day we got a call from a guardian ad litem who said, hey, the case took an unusual turn today, and it looks like after 2.5 years, she's going to go home. And to say that we were crushed would be an understatement. To say that there were tears would be an understatement. We didn't know what to do. We felt so much like God had said, hey, this is what I want for you and for this little girl. And here's the thing, we knew the case really well. We knew what was going on really well. 2.5 years, you get to know a lot. And it really felt like this was not what was best for her or for anybody really in the situation. And so it was discouraging. It was up against the backside of a wall that felt like, why are we here? And we wanted to give up and we wanted to quit, but we said, we gotta trust God. So we started praying this prayer. Here's the prayer we prayed, starting that very moment. Connie and I said, hey, let's pray that the truth will be seen and exactly how it is, that whatever is true will be seen fully, And that anything that is not true will not be seen at all. And that however that lands, if that means she goes home, then we will celebrate it with you, God. If that means we get to be her mom and dad like we thought we were going to get to be, and she thinks that we're going to be all she ever knew, really, then we'll be glad for that too. But we'll trust you, God. We'll trust you. And so we actually, that day, they called us and they said, later on that week, they said, hey, the meeting, there's going to be a huge meeting on this day. And this is really where the judge is going to be there. Some others are going to be there. And this is where they're going to really make their final decision on this case. And so we just said, all right, well, we're going to pray, God. We're going to trust you. I mean, you talk about walking with no assurity. You talk about walking with not knowing anything and just feeling like so discouraged at times. And so we were kind of waiting on a phone call to come in after that meeting, and we knew we were going to get a phone call. So we went over to Essentials Coffee, actually, and we were sitting in Essentials Coffee, and we were just waiting, and all of a sudden Connie's phone rang, and she looked and she said, hey, it's the guardian ad litem. This is the phone call. We're going to find out right now. So she went outside, and she started to talk just a little while, and I'm in there going like, what's going on? I got the other kids with me, and I'm trying to manage them, but I'm like, I'm nervous wreck, and I'm thinking, what in the world's happening? What's going to go on? And then she walked back in, and she's just weeping, just crying. And so I'm like, all right, God, we prayed, and we trusted you, and I understand. Now, what I should have known, and I should have known this after all these years of knowing Connie, my wife cries when she's sad. My wife cries when she's happy. My wife cries when she's indifferent. My wife, she just cries. So she comes in and she's crying, and I'm like, it's the worst, and she comes over and she sits down and she's like, the truth was seen today. It actually got pretty shaky, pretty violent, and the truth was seen, and they're going to start TPR, termination of parental rights, as soon as possible. And we got to see that at that wall, when we almost were so discouraged that we wanted to quit, that this is what breakthrough actually looks like. Because this is on Naya's adoption day. At 4 years old, she finally got to call officially those that she had called mom and dad for 2.5 years. Mom and dad, we got to celebrate with her. We get to tell her these stories. We get to show her what breakthrough really looks like. She's 10 years old now. She got her ears pierced yesterday, and she's kind of sassy about that. So if you see her, she thinks she's Miss Hot Stuff right now. So just, she's got her hair tucked behind her ears so you can see it. So just make sure you see it. But we got to see breakthrough. And it was hard. And let me tell you, the 16 were hard. But God gave us a promise. We knew that he had promised us he wanted to strengthen and grow our family. And we thought he was going to do it that way. And at times we wanted to give him some ought-tos, I can tell you. But he showed us that he did it the way that was best. And he came through. Can I just tell you, don't give up. Don't quit. You are so close. Where do you need to let God be God? God, I pray as we respond to you now, that we would push past 6. So many are on the 6th lap right now, and they're about to quit. God, I'm just praying a spirit of pushing past 6 over this place. So God, that we would go to the cross, knowing that the cross is the perfect reminder of never to quit, because Jesus, even when you were on it, you said, it is finished. We'll take communion knowing that it's the body and the blood of Jesus that pays for our ability to even have this beautiful thing called grace. And then we'll light candles as a significant place where we would say, we're going to push past 6 today. And then our prayer team is here. They would love to pray with you. So God, we pray that you would just stir people up towards repentance, towards response as we sing and worship now. In Jesus' name, amen.